Did you know that we're not all Golden Age Hollywood actors as famous because of their talent? Instead, some rode a wave of well-timed marketing, seductive looks, or carefully orchestrated controversies, leaving film buffs to wonder if skill really mattered at all. What if these well-known legends owed their success to pure luck and a dash of scandal? Here is the moral stories. Victor Mature, one of the earliest icons to highlight beauty over dramatic range, was Victor Mature. He became a recognizable leading man thanks to biblical epics like Samson and Delilah, yet critics derided him for sounding more wooden than the sets he stood on. In a moment of self-awareness that still fuels rumors, he once quipped, "I'm no actor, and I've got 64 films to prove it." Yet his towering build and smoldering gaze earned him top billing when audiences were hungry for sword-swinging escapism. Timing was his friend. Post-war crowds wanted spectacular, heroic tales, and studios delivered them with Victor Mature's intimidating physique front and center, Esther Williams. Meanwhile, Esther Williams floated to fame, quite literally. Known as MGM's $1 Million Mermaid, she starred in lavish musicals where she'd glide gracefully through pools or glitzy water tanks. Moviegoers lapped it up, dazzled by elaborate choreographed routines. The dialogue, on the other hand, was often so flat that her co-stars had to carry entire scenes. But it hardly mattered, because the real spectacle was her swirling underwater ballets. Audiences so adored her aquatic feats that critics' complaints about bland line deliveries barely made a ripple. Anita Ekberg. If you prefer glamorous nightlife over chlorine-scented musicals, Anita Ekberg might ring a bell. Her standout moment in La Dolce Vita immortalized her wading through Rome's Trevi Fountain in an ethereal black dress. But beyond that hypnotic image, rumors swirled that directors found her accent and stiff demeanor difficult to work with. Viewers only cared that she looked utterly captivating on camera. The scene became a cinematic legend, overshadowing the critiques of her actual performance. Steve Reeves. Then there's Steve Reeves, the muscle-bound star whose Greek god physique launched the sword and sandal trend. It hardly mattered if he delivered lines like a monotone announcer. Crowds went wild for his rippling arms as he hoisted boulders or wrestled mythic beasts. Whispers in the industry claimed that producers would add scene after scene of Reeves flexing, confident that one more feat of strength was all it took to keep people buying tickets. In a Hollywood intoxicated by spectacle, the bar for acting soared far lower when the leading man resembled a real-life Hercules. But muscles and beauty weren't the only surefire paths to fame. If you walked onto the set wearing actual medals from the battlefield, success often followed just as quickly. Zsa Zsa Gabor. For many, Hollywood's golden age conjures images of diamond-draped starlets gliding from premiere to premiere. None captured that lifestyle more famously than Zsa Zsa Gabor. She seemed to treat film sets as mere accessories to her real talent, mesmerizing high society and the tabloids. With her sultry accent and unapologetic flair for drama, she generated headlines through multiple marriages, outspoken interviews, and razor-sharp wit. Whispers around town suggested she was less actress and more professional celebrity, carefully curating every public appearance to keep her name in lights. Performance? Optional, as long as she stayed on the front pages. Jane Mansfield. If Zsa Zsa was about elegance, Jane Mansfield was about audacity. Known for her bombshell figure, she appeared to thrive on orchestrating public stunts, some more borderline than others. A rumored photo shoot with exotic animals, her epic plunging necklines and cheeky publicity stunts almost ensured she'd be front-page news. Directors might have groaned at her comedic timing. Some found it forced, others found it non-existent, but the public devoured the spectacle. Mansfield's entire aura screamed, "Look at me!" And boy, did the press oblige. Mamie Van Doren. Mamie Van Doren rounds out this trio of scandal-fueled success. She was pitched as a rival to Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield, flaunting platinum hair and an unapologetically sultry persona. Moviegoers saw her in titles like High School Confidential and Untamed Youth, but critics claimed that these roles demanded little beyond pouting, hip-wiggling, and delivering a few catchy lines. Industry insiders rumored she was one of the first self-aware bombshells, openly acknowledging that she wasn't hired for subtlety. Instead, she banked on late 1950s drive-in crowd seeking a seductive thrill, proving that sex appeal and a good marketing hook could rival any acting degree. Roy Rogers. Few images scream classic Hollywood like a cowboy silhouette on the horizon, and Roy Rogers was the very embodiment of that squeaky clean frontier dream. Dubbed the King of the Cowboys, he strutted through dusty towns, singing cheerful tunes that families across America loved. Critics, however, rolled their eyes at his acting, calling it one-note and safe. Rumor had it that studios didn't want him to be a gripping dramatist anyway. They wanted a folksy hero kids could idolize. With his loyal horse trigger and a devotion to gentle storytelling, Roy Rogers was exactly that, leaving nuanced performances to other corners of Hollywood. John Wayne. Of course, the larger world of Westerns also included some of cinema's most iconic tough guys, especially John Wayne. For many fans, Wayne was the definitive American hero, stoic and unflinching. But detractors complained that he basically played himself in every film. Same slow drawl, same deliberate walk, same unyielding persona. While critics pined for more emotional range, the box office soared. Wayne's no-nonsense bravado matched mid-century America's desire for unwavering strength. Political controversies buzzed around him too. Some admired his patriotic fervor, while others found it off-putting. Regardless, the public fell in love with his mythic presence, overshadowing any technical acting limitations. Rory Calhoun. Then there was Rory Calhoun, forever wearing a cowboy hat and swaggering through B-grade Western after B-grade Western. People found him handsome enough and believed he could handle a horse well, but behind closed doors, directors frequently noted that he gave the same grin, the same measured line delivery in every film. It hardly mattered. Studios needed fresh cowboy faces to fill endless rosters of Western flicks, and Calhoun was reliable. If you needed a man who could realistically hold a revolver and say, "Hold it right there," he was your guy. Lex Barker. And let's not forget Lex Barker, who stepped into the role of Tarzan after Johnny Weissmuller. Much like the chiseled heroes above, Barker's physical charm was key. When his Tarzan stint ended, he moved to westerns and adventure movies, capitalizing on the same formula of good looks and a robust physique. Insider gossip claimed that directors arranged entire scenes around his shirtless moments, apparently more convinced by his torso than by his line readings. Tab Hunter. Nothing turned the heads of 1950s and 60s youth quite like a photogenic face splashed on a magazine cover. Tab Hunter knew that effect all too well. He soared in popularity, practically invented as a heartthrob by Warner Brothers. Some whispered that his entire career was an image-driven fabrication. But teenage girls didn't care if his melodramatic speeches rang hollow. They just wanted to see that sunny smile on the big screen. Behind closed doors, rumor had it, he juggled a more complex personal life, one the studio system made sure never reached the tabloids. Troy Donahue. Another shining example was Troy Donahue. With his golden hair and surfer boy looks, he embodied that post-war teenage dream. Movies like A Summer Place showcased him as the moody, sensitive, romantic lead. The movies themselves were forgettable soap operas, but Donahue's star soared on the strength of fan magazines, personal appearances, and that intangible heartthrob factor. Once the cultural tide shifted toward gritty, rebellious anti-heroes, his clean-cut vibe felt outdated, and his fame began slipping through his fingers. Van Johnson. On the wholesome end of that spectrum was Van Johnson, the lovable, freckled performer who seemed to bounce between musicals, war dramas, and light comedies without ever disappearing from view. Critics derided him as a lightweight, but audiences adored him for bringing a sense of sunny optimism, especially during the uncertainty of World War II. Studio execs knew that if viewers wanted gentle escapism, Van Johnson would deliver. No method acting meltdown required. John Derek, with his piercing gaze and perfect cheekbones, had a different challenge, being pigeonholed as the handsome romantic lead. Directors often tried to coax layered performances out of him, but those close to the sets allegedly complained that Derek was better at posing than emoting. Later in life, he took control of the camera, directed films that predominantly showcased his wives, moving from heartthrob to behind-the-scenes orchestrator, but never truly achieving critical acclaim in either role. Pat Boone. And then there's Pat Boone, a squeaky clean crooner who squealed into the pop charts before dabbling in film. Though his voice was well loved by families who disapproved of rock and roll, his on-screen presence felt as controlled and sanitized as his music. Insiders joked that Boone could sing a lullaby to a raging bull and it would still sound tame. Yet that same safe factor guaranteed him a loyal base that kept his films profitable. Alan Ladd. Rounding out this cluster of pinups and safe-bet leads is Alan Ladd, a star who shone brightest in Shane, playing the tight-lipped heroic gunfighter. Critics grudgingly admitted his minimal dialogue suited the role, but in more dialogue-heavy pictures, Ladd's whispery style seemed underwhelming. Rumors circulated that scripts were sometimes trimmed to accommodate his subtle approach, focusing on his silent intensity. It worked well enough to solidify him as a star, though many watchers suspected that he could easily fade if the studios ever demanded a more expressive performance. Deborah Paget. Deborah Paget appeared destined for stardom from her earliest Technicolor roles. With delicate features that fit directors' visions of foreign princesses or mysterious maidens, she was cast in a string of exotic parts. Rumors spread that she found these roles stifling, longing for deeper parts. Yet studios had a formula. Drape Paget in a shimmering costume, give her a dance number, and bank on her ethereal appeal. Some behind-the-scenes talk implied that even she recognized the one-note pattern, lamenting that she was more prop than performer. Rhonda Fleming. Rhonda Fleming, famously called the Queen of Technicolor, was similarly trapped by her looks. Her vivid red hair and bright green eyes lit up the big screen, making her a perfect match for the post-war obsession with rich, saturated color. She starred in films like Spellbound and Out of the Past, but critics pointed out that she was rarely given the juicy, layered roles that might challenge her acting. Directors cast her primarily to add visual flair, enhancing the production value. In an era still wowed by color film's novelty, that was sometimes enough to sell tickets, even if her lines didn't resonate on a deep, emotional level. George Raft. Imagine an actor so convincingly tough that you half believe he's been hustling on street corners his entire life. George Raft boasted real links to notorious underworld figures, which fueled his gangster image in films like Scarface. He rarely bothered with subtlety. Most roles required him to glare, sneer, and maybe fire a prop gun. Still, that was enough for audiences of the day who just wanted to see an authentic, tough guy. Industry gossip claimed Raft passed on major film opportunities, inadvertently gifting them to the up-and-coming Humphrey Bogart. Even so, he never vanished from screens, proving that typed casting plus a dash of real-life mob mystique goes a long way. Jeff Chandler. Meanwhile, Jeff Chandler had a deep baritone voice that could rattle windows, a commanding presence tailor-made for playing stoic heroes or men of action. Even so, critics often claimed his performances lacked nuance, painting him as a sturdy, one-dimensional figure. Studio execs didn't mind. They saw in Chandler a reliable emblem of strength, sometimes even an authority figure in uniform or Western gear. His looks and voice sold tickets, regardless of whether each line reading soared or stumbled. But for some, the real magic lay not in machismo or heartthrob appeal, but in the polished aura that only a major studio's star-making machinery could create. Robert Taylor. No name epitomizes that perfect profile mystique better than Robert Taylor. MGM famously billed him as the man with the flawless face, and he headlined classics like Camille. Nonetheless, behind the curtain, critics and co-stars muttered that Taylor often seemed more statue than actor. He was precise, polite, and photogenic, but never risked pushing emotional boundaries on screen. Rumor had it that MGM boss Louis B. Mayer cared more about how Taylor's face looked on a poster than whether his performance resonated with depth. For a while, that strategy worked. Moviegoers just wanted to see that impossibly handsome leading man, no matter how hollow his lines sometimes rang. Fernando Lamas. Finally, there's Fernando Lamas, the suave Argentine star who specialized in roles that screamed Latin lover. Studios cast him across musicals and romantic comedies, pairing him with bombshells like Esther Williams. In these productions, the script required little more than a charming accent, a few seductive glances, and a confident swagger. Although industry insiders occasionally teased Lamas about being a walking cliché, the audiences lapped it up. As long as he twirled his leading ladies convincingly and kept that exotic flair, the tickets sold. Over the course of these 25 stories, a pattern emerges. In the so-called golden age of Hollywood, image often mattered more than mastery. Some stars soared on the strength of their physical appeal. Some capitalized on genuine war records, while others leaned into controversies or squeaky clean reputations. In each case, studios spun a narrative that fed perfectly into the desires of an eager public. Whether that meant a bombshell posing for scandalous tabloid photos or a cowboy crooning happy tunes in the dusty desert sun. We remember these names as legends, even if their performances sometimes left critics underwhelmed. And in a way, that might be the real legacy of classic Hollywood, the ability to craft a persona so enthralling that people no longer cared about the substance beneath. It raises a question for our modern age. Have things really changed? Or are we still chasing charismatic illusions, allowing hype and spectacle to define stardom just as much today as it did under those glimmering studio lights? Only time and the next wave of fame-hungry faces will tell. But one thing is certain, in Hollywood, the performance behind the scenes can be even more fascinating than the one on the screen.